Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and AP English and our Roberts lectures. We are now looking at Robert Lowell's Memories of West Street and Lepke, his 1959 offering. Now, I'm going to make the argument that this is one of the more remarkable poems that we will study out of the Roberts volume. Of course, Robert Lowell himself, very, very important poet, and there's some background information that's necessary as well to really appreciate this poem. Let's just do some quick biography of Lowland. We'll pay attention to this footnote at the bottom of 732 in your Roberts volume. Born in 1917, dies in 77. He is, as we said, a great American poet. He was born into a really famous, some have called it a Brahmin family of Boston, origins going all the way back to the Mayflower itself. His poems were influenced very much by his life of living in the Boston area, as well as the family that was so important to him. And we'll see some of that biography even in this poem. He does win in 1960 the National Book Award. He was part of the confessional poetry movement, and he wins the Pulitzer in 47 and in 74. To really appreciate this poem, though, Memories of West Street and Lepke, we have to look at this footnote at the bottom of the page. The West Street Jail, I'm just reading now with you. The West Street Jail in Lower Manhattan, where Lowell spent 10 days in 1943 before being sent to a federal prison to serve a year's sentence as a CO, means conscientious objector, refusing to serve in the armed services during World War II. This will be the backdrop then for this poem. Now, we often will say that the speaker in the poem is not the poet. And yet in this situation, we are going to have a situation where most likely we can argue the speaker of the poem is in fact Lowell himself. Now, before we listen to Robert Lowell himself read this poem, which is awesome that we get to hear him reading this poem, I just want to point out the ways in which this is going to be a poem that draws heavily on our study of Shakespeare's Macbeth. Of course, at LearnStrong.net, we've already given full lectures on Macbeth. He got what he wanted, but he lost what he had. You'll maybe recall the mantra. We will pay particular attention to the ways in which Macbeth, the poem, and notions of time and place, and especially clothing, are going to factor heavily. You'll remember in our study of Macbeth, we said that clothing is an important subplot, a major theme of the play. We're going to see this played out here as well. All right, let's pay attention now to the reading itself and enjoy Lowell's reading of this poem.
Memories of West Street and Lepke. Only teaching on Tuesdays, bookworming in pajamas fresh from the washer each morning. I hog a whole house on Boston's hardly passionate Marlborough Street, where even the man scavenging filth in the back alley trash cans has two children, a beach wagon, a helpmate, and is a young Republican. I have a 9-month daughter, young enough to be my granddaughter. Like the sun, she rises in her flame flamingo infant's wear. These are the tranquilized 50s, and I'm 40. Ought I to regret my seed time? I was a fire-breathing Catholic CO and made my manic statement telling off the state and president, and then sat waiting sentence in the bullpen beside a Negro boy with curlicues of marijuana in his hair. Given a year, I walked on the roof of the West Street Jail, a short enclosure like my school soccer court, and saw the Hudson River once a day through sooty clothesline entanglements and bleaching khaki tenements. Strolling, I yammered metaphysics with Abramowitz, a jaundiced yellow. It's really tan, and flyweight pacifist, so vegetarian, he wore rope shoes and preferred fallen fruit. He tried to convert Bioff and Brown, the Hollywood pimps, to his diet. Hairy, muscular, suburban, wearing chocolate double-breasted suits, they blew their tops and beat him black and blue. I was so out of things, I'd never heard of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Are you a CO? I asked a fellow jailbird. No, he answered, I'm a JW. He taught me the hospital tuck. and pointed out the T-shirted back of Murder Incorporated Tsar Lepke there piling towels on a rack, or dawdling off to his little segregated cell full of things forbidden the common man. A portable radio, a dresser, 2 toy American flags tied together with a ribbon of Easter palm. Flabby, bald, lobotomized, he drifted in a sheepish calm where no agonizing reappraisal jarred his concentration on the electric chair, hanging like an oasis in his air of lost connections.
Now, let's go ahead and say out loud, this is a very complex poem, very complicated poem. We're going to pay attention, for example, at level 2B, the rhetorical level. We'll pay attention to things like stanzas and the development of stanzas. But let's go ahead right away in our notes. And let's begin with characterization. I mean, this is really the focus of this chapter 13 of Roberts anyway. So let's pay attention to the juxtaposition between the speaker, we'll go ahead and call him Lowell, and the different other characters in the poem. We begin in the first stanza. Notice we begin with the word only, and we finish this poem with an ellipsis. I think set between the word only and the ellipsis, we have all kinds of interesting speculation happening here that will begin with himself. Notice he is a teacher, but he only teaches on Tuesdays, bookworming in pajamas. Notice, however, these pajamas, again, clothing, fresh from the washer each morning. So we're right away going to have an interesting kind of socioeconomic underpinnings. So many have read this with Marxist underpinnings as they read through the poem. Notice the phrase, I hog a whole house on Boston's Marlborough Street. In other words, this notion of I am in a position, socioeconomically, that I can have an entire house to myself, as opposed to noticing the man scavenging filth in the back alley trash cans, who has 2 children, a beach wagon, a helpmate. Notice the language here of helpmate will take us immediately to our study of Milton and the Genesis 3 account, and of course Eve and all of that. We'll get to fallen fruit in a little bit to see how Lowell is playing around with his Shakespeare and his Milton in this poem, no question, right? He says about himself that he has a 9-month-old daughter. Now, the fact that he's 40 already makes him, in relationship to her, old enough that he could be her grandfather as well as her father. And then she will rise like the sun in her flame flamingo infant's wear. Again, the Marxist reading here, the socioeconomic reading, is that everything in America in the 50s, as we'll hear about the tranquilized 50s in the next stanza, is about advertising, right? Okay, it's about the ways that we are influenced through advertising and, of course, capitalism in general. Again, to the second stanza now. These are the tranquilized 50s, and I'm 40. And then the question of the poem, ought I to regret my seed time? There's a Blake poem that comes to mind here right away. This idea that this is the real central question. In other words, have I squandered my youth? Have I given away everything that I had? Again, go back to our mantra of Macbeth. He got what he wanted, power, right? But he lost what he had. Notice, he says several things about it himself. He says, I was a fire-breathing Catholic, a conscientious objector. I made my manic statement telling off the state. Notice the euphemisms that are utilized here, right? And the president, and then sat waiting in a cell in a bullpen. We have several sports references here, soccer in a bit, now bullpen. Beside a Negro boy, of course the language of Negro boy is going to be language of an earlier time, obviously, with curlicues of marijuana in his hair. So notice, already our speaker juxtaposed against several other kinds of people in the poem. A person scavenging for food in a trash can out behind his house. Here, a young African-American boy who has been busted for something and has marijuana curlicues in his hair. Then the third stanza. He's going to be sentenced for a year. He says, I walked on the roof of the West Street jail a short enclosure like my school soccer court. Now, the notion of school soccer court will again put him, socioeconomically growing up, in some kind of parochial school, maybe a private school of a kind. In other words, he's in a completely different foreign environment now. This is the price he must pay for being a conscientious objector, refusing to fight in the war, right? He says that he got to see the Hudson River once a day through sooty clothesline entanglements and bleaching khaki tenements. So notice all the way through we have references to garments in one way or another. He will talk metaphysics with another person in the jail, Abraham Evans, a jaundiced yellow, it's really tan is what Abraham Evans will say, a flyweight pacifist. So vegetarian. He wore rope shoes and preferred fallen fruit as opposed to, of course, the fruit that Eve will have plucked right off of the tree in Milton's Paradise Lost, the retelling of the Genesis 3 story, as we've lectured about elsewhere. We are then told that this conscientious objector, pacifist, flyweight pacifist, is going to try to convert a couple of others, Buff and Brown, Hollywood pimps, into being vegetarian, and for this they blew their tops and they beat him black and blue. In other words, we have all kinds of tension here going on within this poem, don't we, right? That is to say, we have pacifism versus the idea that, you know, if you mess with me, I'll jack you up. And then we get to the final stanza, and notice how the iambic meter will change. I was so out of things I'd never heard. Hear it? Okay. And all of a sudden, we'll get the part of the title of the poem about Lepke. If you'll read down at the bottom of the poem on 733, Tsar Lepke, Louis Lepke, was a notorious professional criminal, convicted of 2 murders, though he had been connected with as many as 100, and was executed in 1944. Just to continue to read, a reported conversation between Lepke and Lowell took place. Lepke stated that he was in prison for killing, and Lowell responded that he was in prison for refusing to kill. Now to the final stanza. I was so out of things, I'd never heard of the Jehovah's Witness. Are you a CO? I asked a fellow jailbird. No, he answered, I'm a JW, the Jehovah's Witness disapproving of being involved in the war. He taught me several things. The hospital tug pointed out Lepke, piling towels on a rack. And then now we move to this character, Lepke, who is a criminal placed inside of prison and is lobotomized, either literally or spiritually lobotomized. And we learn several things about him as well. Piling towels on a rack, dwaddling off to his little segregated cell, notice separated from the rest of the population, full of things forbidden to the common man. And this is again why the Marxist reading is so common with this poem. He has the portable radio, a dresser, 2 toy American flags tied together. Again, Lepke can become in this poem a symbol of these tranquilized 50s. Lowell may be commenting or critiquing on the ways in which advertising has taken over everything in the 50s, and Americans in many ways have become all about the stuff that they can acquire. And immediately we have to think about Macbeth again as we're thinking about the classic exemplar of he got what he wanted, power, but he lost what he had. Notice to finish now about Lepke, he's flabby, he's bald, he's lobotomized. He drifted in a sheepish calm where no agonizing reprisal jarred his concentration on the electric chair, hanging like an oasis. Again, we think of Eden, so notice how the intermingling of these ideas are in this poem, in his air of lost connections, and then the ellipsis. Now, a lot has been made of the very end of this poem, and the fact that Lowell will end it, not with a punctuation that's a period or an exclamation point or a question mark, but rather the ellipsis, the way in which the poem will end almost like hanging in the air of lost connections, and we go all the way back to the opening line of only teaching on Tuesdays, bookworming in pajamas, and we have this sense that the speaker has lost connections as well. Connections with what? Well, maybe in some ways he's grateful that he's lost connections with the advertising-driven capitalist system of America in, again, the tranquilized 50s. Or maybe he's lost connections of other kinds. his ability to have connections with other people. Solipsism is our philosophic word. That's somehow being so involved with oneself that one is unable to in any way connect with others. Of course, he does have a daughter that he will have spent a year away from while he was in prison for his conscientious objector status. Let's finish now at 2a, the themes and messages here. Well, a number, right? Sometimes, obviously, one major theme is we are punished for standing up for what we believe in, obviously, right? Another major theme here is the understanding of self and others is sometimes hard to come by because we do kind of live in our own little world, right? And of course, society is often ethically contradictory. No question, this is a clear message of this poem. At 2b, the garment theme we've already mentioned, the idea of time and place as it relates to the garment theme, and that juxtaposition or tension between what one has and what one has earned in the process of what one has. At 3a, and how we can relate this to other titles, well, I think it's clear that Macbeth and our study of Macbeth, as well as our study of Milton's Paradise Lost, come to help us here. Finally, at 3b, what was a time when you were punished or misunderstood, and it really was a product of standing up for yourself or taking an opinion that was opposed to others? And finally, what are your thoughts about what it is that you own versus what it is that owns you? And the degree to which maybe you've lost some of those connections because of that. Well, I hope that our study here will lead you to more of the great Robert Lowell, tremendous American poet. Thank you.